Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, we're going to go over this article from Israel 365 News, a prophecy for our time, Zechariah 9 and the Gaza War. This is an article that stood out to me. I came across it. I wanted to cover it in the last video that I did about Elder Bednar, but there wasn't time. But you can see that I had this toward the end of all my tabs that I had opened. And so I said I would do it in this next video. And what's interesting is I recorded that video about Elder Bednar last night on the 7th. And then what happened was later that night, almost 3 a.m. in the morning, I got an email from Elie Michel, and he's the one that wrote this article. He says, not sure if you saw this, but I think your followers would be very interested in this topic. And yeah, I agree. Now, you might remember Elie Michel. I've interviewed him before. In fact, immediately after the war started, he reached out to me and we talked about the war and how he's experienced it. And we talked about Israel. It was a very interesting interview. I also interviewed him 9 months ago and we had an interesting conversation back then. I'll put the links for these videos in the description below in case you want to watch these interviews. But he's the one that wrote this article. And I think he could be onto something about Zechariah 9 being about this war that's going on right now. I'll show you what I mean. Now, like always, I think it's fine to look at what other people have to say from other religions, but we first have to understand what our own doctrine is and what our beliefs are and how we interpret scriptures before we start looking at other explanations and interpretations. So the way that I want to do this, first I want to read Zechariah 9. It's short. It's only 17 verses, so it's short. And then I want to see what it says in the Institute student manual. Okay. And then after that, I want to go over Elie's his article here. And like I said, there are some pretty interesting things. There's a couple things that we would disagree on, but the rest of it, like the majority of it, I don't think really conflicts with anything that we believe. So let's just jump into it. Now, warning, this is an Old Testament chapter. Not all of them read very easily, or it's not always, with a lot of them, they're not really easy to understand. They mention places and things that sometimes we're not familiar with. Don't worry about that. We're going to get into all of it. So just let me read it first. Let's do our due diligence, and then it's going to become clear as we go through the Institute student manual and then read Elie's article. Okay. Chapter 9. Zechariah speaks as the Messiah. The Messiah will come, having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass. He will free the prisoners from the pit. Judah and Ephraim are instruments of the Lord. Okay. So right off the bat, it doesn't seem to be talking about the last days, but just wait till we get to the Institute student manual. It talks about the fact that it is. Okay, verse 1. The burden of the word of the Lord in the land of Hadrach. And this is going to come into play in Elie's article, Hadrach. So just remember that. The burden of the word of the Lord in the land of Hadrach and Damascus shall be the rest thereof, when the eyes of man, as of all the tribes of Israel, shall be toward the Lord. And Hamath also shall border thereby, Tyrus and Sidon, though it be very wise. Don't worry about this. Just let me read this. Tyrus did build herself a stronghold, and heaped up silver as the dust, and fine gold as the mire of the streets. Behold, the Lord will cast her out, and he will smite her power in the sea, and she shall be devoured with fire. Ashkelon, okay, I do want to point this out. Don't worry about those other places yet. Don't get into the fog of it. It'll all be explained later. But I want to point out Ashkelon. Let's go over to the Seva Adom warning website where it has like warnings for rocket attacks. Notice these three areas or cities. You have Gaza City as well as the Gaza Strip, but Gaza City right here, and then just north of there is Ashkelon, and then just north of Ashkelon is Ashdod. So these are all mentioned in this chapter that we're talking about. And by the way, most of the rocket attacks coming from Gaza are at Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Tel Aviv primarily. Some have gone over here to Jerusalem, and some are just kind of around the Gaza Strip itself, like these smaller towns. But the main ones, from what I've seen, it's mostly Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Tel Aviv that get the alerts. Okay, so let's go back here. Ashkelon, which currently, as of today, it is part of Israel. In fact, let me pull this up. I have this pulled up. So this is from the study helps on the church website, or in the back of your scriptures. If you have a quad, it should be in there under Bible maps. So here is the empire of David and Solomon. And you can see here is the Philistines, or Philistia. I don't know how you pronounce that. Philistia? I don't know. But at that time, you had Gaza right here at the far southern part of the land of the Philistines, which were historically an enemy to Israel. And then Ashkelon was there, as well as Ashdod, and then and then Joppa. Okay, so that's what things looked like at the time of David and Solomon. If you want to know more about Gaza and the Philistines, there is this video that I would recommend by Henry Abramson. It was put out just a couple days after the war started. It's called Gaza in Jewish History. He is essentially a scholar on Jewish history, and I've interviewed him as well, by the way. I'll put the link for this interview in the description below. But he does a really good job talking about this area and the history of Gaza, and he talks about the Philistines, then he talks about later the Arabs that now live there today. It's not the same people, but anyway, so just keep these things in mind. Okay, so Ashkelon shall see it and fear. Gaza also shall see it and be very sorrowful, and Ekron, for her expectation, shall be ashamed. And the king shall perish from Gaza, and Ashkelon shall not be inhabited. And a bastard shall dwell in Ashdod, that's that third city, so Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Gaza, and will be cut off, and I will cut off the pride of the Philistines. Remember, the reason why they call, like nowadays, one reason why this area is called Palestine is because of the Romans, because they were aware of the fact that the Israelites had these really fierce enemies, the Philistines, and so they named it after Israel's enemies. So Rome essentially gave it the name that it has today, and the people that are there that identify as Palestinians are the people that lived there before the state of Israel was established, and then they took that name upon themselves, the Palestinians. So the name originally goes back to the Philistines, which were right here. So it's interesting. Okay, and I will take away his blood out of his mouth and his abominations from between his teeth. But he that remaineth, even he shall be for our God. And he shall be as a governor in Judah, and Ekron as a Jebusite. And I will encamp about mine house because of the army, because of him that passeth by, and because of him that returneth. And no oppressor shall pass through them any more. For now I have seen with mine eyes. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass. Now, you can see here, there's a picture that goes along with this on the church website, and it pulls up Christ during Palm Sunday when he entered Jerusalem, and many recognized him as Messiah and King. Okay, so that's how we would interpret this verse, the prophecy of Christ on Palm Sunday. Okay, verse 10, and I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, and the horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace unto the heathen, and his dominion shall be from sea even to sea, and from the river even to the ends of the earth. As for thee also, by the blood of thy covenant, I have sent forth thy prisoners out of the pit wherein is no water. I want you to pay attention to this one right here because Ellie Michelle talks about this. It could be that this has a double meaning. So we already have an interpretation of what this means, but it's not to say that maybe there can't be like sometimes there's like this dualism where you have literal and symbolic, literal and metaphorical, or just multiple fulfillments. So just keep that in mind. Okay, verse 12. Turn you to the stronghold, ye prisoners of hope. Even today do I declare that I will render double unto thee. When I have bent Judah before me, filled the bow with Ephraim, and raised up thy sons, O Zion, against thy sons, O Greece, and made thee as the sword of a mighty man. And the Lord shall be seen over them, and his arrow shall go forth as the lightning, and the Lord shall blow the trumpet, and shall go with whirlwinds of the south. This is also a key verse in his article. The Lord of hosts shall defend them, and they shall devour and subdue with sling stones, and they shall drink and make a noise as through wine, and they shall be filled like bowls and as the corners of the altar. And the Lord their God shall save them in that day as the flock of his people, for they shall be as the stones of a crown, lifted up as an ensign upon this land, upon his land. For how great is his goodness, and how great is his beauty. Corn shall make the young men cheerful, and new wine the maids. Okay, so right off the bat, that's a lot of confusing stuff, I think, to most modern readers. A few things we kind of recognize. We recognize some cities. We recognize that verse that talks about Christ on Palm Sunday. The rest of it, I don't know. It's a little cloudy, a little murky. So let's go ahead and see what it says in the Institute Manual. It starts off by talking about verses 1 through 8, enemies of Judah. Many Bible scholars interpreted these verses as having been fulfilled at the time of Alexander the Great. It is true that Alexander the Great, in approximately 332 BC, destroyed these cities with his army, but the meaning of these verses is broader than that. Quote, and this quote is from commentary by Keel and Delish. Okay, quote, of these, the prophet simply refers to Damascus and Hamath in general terms. And it is only in the case of the Phoenician and Philistine, I don't know how to pronounce that, Philistine cities, that he proceeds to a special description of their fall from their lofty eminence. Okay, now this is interesting because let's again refer to that map. So you have the Phoenicians and the Philistines. Okay, so we already talked about the Philistines being down here, roughly in the area of modern-day Gaza, at least in the case of Gaza City. But down here, but then to the north, I'm sure many of you already know, you have Phoenicia, which is essentially where modern-day Lebanon is. So, for those of you following the war, you know that the main actors in this war are Israel, and then Hamas operating out of the Gaza Strip. You also have Palestinian Islamic Jihad operating out of the Gaza Strip. But then we have our eyes north to Lebanon, or ancient Phoenicia, essentially, where you have Hezbollah, where there has been a little bit of back and forth. And there is also Hamas up here, I've learned. Hamas has rocket launching capabilities from Lebanon. So you have these two, okay? Phoenicia, Lebanon, and Gaza, the Philistines, roughly. Now, I'm not saying that this is like the correct interpretation. Okay. In fact, sometimes I like to kind of like stay away from this thing, usually trying to like match up like countries in the scriptures with modern day countries, or how I am. But I'm okay, at least being aware of it. Let's just see what it says here. So of these, The prophet simply refers to Damascus and Hamath in general terms, and it is only in the case of the Phoenician and Philistine cities that he proceeds to a special description of their fall from their lofty eminence, because they stood nearest to the kingdom of Israel and represented the might of the kingdom of the world and its hostility to the kingdom of God. Well, that does align pretty well with what we see today. You know, the most hostile toward Israel would be Hamas, Hezbollah, which of course they are proxy groups for Iran. So Iran being like the main party there. But this is just kind of interesting to think about this. And then continuing. Oh, and by the way, when it says and represented the might of the kingdom of the world, we may not think about that today when you think about Hamas and Hezbollah, unless you think about it in terms of those nations that stand above them. I just said Iran, but we've also talked about the possibility of this axis or this alliance between those that are against the West, like Russia and China. So if you think about it in those terms, then yeah, maybe, and I don't know, we're probably not going to know this for sure until after everything's all said and done, but it may just be that what's happening right now in Israel is more than what's being reported as simply Hamas just going it alone. They came up with this idea alone. They're acting alone. That may not be how it actually is. This may actually go all the way to the top, beyond just Iran. Who knows? We'll find out later. All right, continuing. Partly in the worldly development of their own might and partly in their hostility to the covenant nation. The description is an individualizing one throughout, exemplifying general facts by particular cities. This is also evident from the announcement of salvation from Zion in verses 8 through 10, from which we may see that the overthrow of the nations hostile to Israel stands in intimate connection with the establishment of the Messianic kingdom. Okay, I have something to say about that. We've read before in our study on this channel that essentially when Christ came, when he came in his mortal ministry, the kingdom came with him. It was essentially established, both ecclesiastical, and had things gone quote unquote right, if there had not been any opposition, the actual kingdom, the political kingdom, would have been established at that time. But they rejected him. He was crucified, and both the ecclesiastical kingdom and the political kingdom left with him, or left with the loss of the priesthood keys after the apostles and any who held keys were killed. So you see how, yes, it's talking about him, specifically a moment when he was recognized as king, and they had the palm fronds in their hand, and they were recognizing him as Messiah and King. How that was just the very, 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 very beginning of the political kingdom, and now in the last days, it's going to come to its full, fruition. The kingdom of God, the ecclesiastical kingdom of God, has been established, but then the political kingdom will be soon. So you can see how it all goes together. Yes, we're talking about his mortal ministry, but we're also talking about the last days and the overthrow of nations that stand in opposition to the gospel, essentially. You see that? So this is also evident from the announcement of salvation for Zion in verses 8 through 10, from which we may see that the overthrow of the nations hostile to Israel stands in intimate connection with the establishment of the Messianic kingdom. And it is also confirmed by the second half of our chapter, where the conquest of the imperial power by the people of God is set forth in the victories of Judah and Ephraim over the sons of Javan. Don't worry about Javan. It's basically the church, Christ's kingdom, overthrowing the kingdoms of the world. that the several peoples and cities mentioned by name are simply introduced as representatives of the imperial power, it is evident from the distinction made in this verse between the rest of mankind and all the tribes of Israel. End quote. Okay, Zechariah 9:9. What special relevance did this verse have to the life of Jesus? Okay, well, what's that verse? It's this one right here. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass. Okay. After issuing a threat of judgment on the wicked nations surrounding Judah, Zechariah recorded a passage that both Matthew and John saw as having been fulfilled by Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, riding on a donkey's back. Verses 11 through 12, who are the prisoners? Elder Bruce R. McConkie explained, quote, It was of these that Zechariah prophesied when, as part of a longer messianic utterance, he spoke of prisoners of hope, quote unquote. It was of these that he gave assurance that the Lord their God shall save them. He gives the messianic message in these words: By the blood of the covenant, that is, because of the gospel covenant, which is efficacious because of the shedding of the blood of Christ, I have sent forth thy prisoners out of the pit wherein is no water. Wherein is no water, how aptly and succinctly this crystallizes the thought that the saving water, which is baptism, is an earthly ordinance and cannot be performed in spirit by spirit beings while they dwell in the spirit world. Did not Paul say in this same connection, what shall they do which are baptized for the dead, if the dead rise not at all? Why are they then baptized for the dead? Okay. And then the last one, Zechariah 9, verses 13 through 17. Judah and Ephraim blessed. There will come a day when Judah and Ephraim will be one. All Israel will be united. Okay, so this, verses 13 through 17, is not about right now, because right now Ephraim and Judah are not fully united. But they will be soon, especially in particular at the time of the second coming. When the Jews recognize him as Christ, the Messiah, and then they join the church. And we've talked about that before. I'm not going to go into all the details right now, but we've talked about the gospel going to the Jews. Okay. The Lord will defend his people, Israel, against Greece, or in other words, the world. In that day, Israel will become as a crown of precious stones and an ensign to all people. So, it's talking about the last days. It's talking about the two groups. It's talking about how they will be united. Either way, in the lead up to the second coming, the Lord will defend his people against the world. And then it says, see notes and commentary on Isaiah 11, verses 13 through 14. So I wanted to read that also really quick. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim. Anciently, during the days of the divided kingdoms, Judah, the leading tribe of the southern kingdom, and Ephraim, the leading tribe of the northern kingdom, were often in competition. Sometimes they were even at war with each other. Isaiah prophesied that in the last days, that conflict would come to an end. Ezekiel, in a similar prophecy, promised that the house of Israel would no longer be divided, that under their true king, the new David, which of course is Christ, they would be one united nation again. Jeremiah and Zechariah also spoke of the future reuniting of the house of Israel. Elder LeGrand Richards explained how this prophecy must be fulfilled. Quote, we are from Ephraim. The Lord expects us, since we are the custodians of the gospel, as restored in these latter days, according to my understanding, to extend the hand of friendship to Judah, because after all, we are all descendants of the prophets Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we come under the promise that through their descendants should all the nations of the earth be blessed. I do not know how the enmity and the envy between Ephraim and Judah can disappear, except that we of the house of Ephraim, who have the custody of the gospel, should lead out in trying to bring to this branch of the house of Israel the blessings of the restored gospel. And it seems to me that the only way that the tribe of Judah can be sanctified to dwell in his presence forever and ever will be when we bring to them the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, as the Savior promised them it would be brought in the latter days. Okay, we've gone over the fact. I'm not going to pull up the poll right now, but I've done a poll, and we do have people that are in this audience that say that they're from Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. The three tribes that we typically think of as Jews today. Okay, so it's starting to happen. The Lord's going to protect both peoples in the lead up to the second coming against their enemies. So with all that in mind, let's go ahead and go to Elie Michel's article, A Prophecy for Our Time, Zechariah 9 and the Gaza War. And he points out some pretty interesting things. When seeking signs of current events in the Bible, it's important to do so with care and humility. History is littered with exciting yet false interpretations of Scripture. Nevertheless, the Bible is not a book of history, but rather an eternal book that speaks to every generation. And so we must, despite the dangers, seek to understand the tumultuous times we are living in through the lens of the Bible. With this in mind, I believe that the 9th chapter of the book of Zechariah was written for our generation and specifically for this painful time. Now, of course, and he would admit he can't say that for sure. We can't say that for sure, but it sure would be interesting if that's true. But this is the whole, topic of this video. Is chapter 9 specific to what's going on right now when we're talking about the latter days and the nations that are hostile to Israel? On October 7th, Hamas terrorists brutalized, raped, and murdered over 1,400 Jews, the worst and most sickening massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Yeah, if you didn't know, that's true. Since the Holocaust, in a single day, we're talking about October 7th, there has not been a deadlier day in Jewish history since the Holocaust. A single day, okay? I'm not talking about the entirety of the Holocaust and the entirety of what's happening right now, just October 7th. Deadliest day since the Holocaust. Hamas also abducted 242 hostages, including babies, children, and elderly Holocaust survivors. Hezbollah, another radical terrorist group sponsored by Iran and based in Lebanon on Israel's northern border, soon joined Hamas in attacking Israel. In response, Israel has launched a full-scale war against Hamas in Gaza while simultaneously engaging with Hezbollah in the north. Last week, the Iran-backed Houthi, that's how it's pronounced, Houthi rebels of Yemen joined the attack on Israel, launching missile and drone attacks on Eilat, Israel's southernmost city. Okay, so just as a quick reminder, remember what we talked about earlier. You have down here the land of the Philistines in ancient times, and then the Phoenicians up here, what are now Lebanon and Gaza and the Gaza Strip, but more especially like down here. Not Ashkelon, not Ashdod. Those are now, that's Israeli territory today, but the city of Gaza. Okay. All right. A close study of the 9th chapter of Zechariah makes clear that this war was prophesied by Zechariah. Most significantly, studying Zechariah's words can give us a great strength during this deeply painful time. A prophecy for our time. One of the challenges in interpreting prophecy is determining which era of history the prophet is prophesying about. The words of the prophets are often opaque and difficult to interpret clearly. Some prophecies were meant for the near term, such as when Jeremiah prophesied the destruction of the temple, while other prophecies concerned the distant future. Chapter 9 of Zechariah begins with a reference to the land of Hadrach. Remember that? That was at the very beginning. Hadrach. Quote, the prophecy of the word of the Lord in the land of Hadrach. Zechariah 9:1. But where is the mysterious land of Hadrach? According to one of the Talmudic sages, Hadrach is not a country, but rather a hint to the time period addressed in this chapter. In Hebrew, the word Hadrach can be spoken in two separate words: had, meaning sharp, and rach, meaning soft. Quote, Rabbi Judah, the son of Eli, expounded, this refers to the Messiah who is sharp against the nations and soft to Israel. Cited by Rashi, Zechariah 9:1. Cited by Rashi, talking about Zechariah 9:1. When the Messiah arrives, he will inaugurate an era that will be very sharp and painful for Israel's enemies, but soft and joyous for Israel. So this is interesting because this is essentially the concept of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. So in the article, in the Jewish way, they would interpret it as being Israel's like actual enemies, these different countries and terrorist groups and stuff like that. Whereas we would be more inclined to say it'll be the dreadful day of the Lord for the wicked, which certainly would include these people that carried out these horrible attacks, I would assume. I don't know how you could be a good person and participate in something like that. So it'll be the dreadful day for the wicked, and then it'll be a great day for those that are righteous. Okay, continuing. According to Rabbi Judah, this chapter speaks about the era of redemption and difficult events that will occur in the generations before the Messiah finally appears. So remember, when they say the redemption, that's the equivalent of the way that we would view the second coming and the millennium. So he's essentially saying this chapter is about the second coming and the millennium in the generations right before it. In the ninth verse of the chapter also makes clear that this chapter is speaking of the Messianic age. Be exceedingly happy, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king shall come to you. He is just and victorious, humble, and riding a donkey and a foal, I think, the offspring of one of she-donkeys. So here, Eli is saying that this is talking about, when they say the Messianic age, that's essentially what we would think of as the millennium. So this is one area where we would, disagree. We believe that this is talking about when Christ came on Palm Sunday, recognized as king, his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. However, there is the fact that is related to the last days and to the overcoming of all these nations. That kingdom that was initially brought by Christ when he came, it will return. The political kingdom will return, and there will be an end to all nations. In the political, literal sense, there will be an end to all nations. Okay. Rashi, the great Jewish commentator, explains, quote, it is impossible to interpret this except as referring to the King Messiah, as it is stated, and his rule shall be from sea to sea. We do not find that Israel had such a ruler during the days of the Second Temple, and so this chapter must be referring to the Messianic age. End quote. And I think he's right. But just with the misunderstanding that Christ was the Messiah when he came, it's just that he was crucified and rejected. The church was on the earth for a while, and then they were rejected. The apostles were killed. The priesthood keys left, and we entered into this period of the great apostasy. But yes, it is going to be during the last days and the second coming. Christ is going to come the second time, and so therefore, yes, at that time when Christ comes, it is going to be from sea to sea and all over the entire world. That's going to be his dominion, the entire world. Okay, so continuing, we are currently living in the quote unquote Messianic age, the generations leading up to the arrival of the Messiah. The Messianic age refers to the time when the people of Israel have returned to their land and the prophecies of the Bible are being fulfilled. A war in the north. Zechariah first speaks of an enemy in the north. Quote, and Tyre, in fact, let's look for that here. So here's Tyre, right? Phoenicia, or the Phoenician kingdom, empire. Here's Tyre. Let's go back here. And Tyre, which is in modern-day Lebanon, built a fortification for herself, and she gathered silver like dust and gold like the mire on the streets. Behold, the Lord shall impoverish her, and he shall smite her wealth in the sea, and she shall be consumed by fire. Zechariah 9, verses 3 through 4. Ancient Tyre was located on the southern coast of Lebanon, 83 kilometers south of Beirut, where the Iranian-backed terror group Hezbollah is currently fortified. Receiving billions of dollars in funding from Iran, Hezbollah has gathered silver like dust and gold like the mire of the streets, funding it used to stockpile 150,000 deadly rockets that it has aimed and begun to fire at Israel. As I write this, Israeli towns near the northern border have been evacuated, and there are daily clashes with Hezbollah. Yeah, and you can see that here. So when you go to these rocket alerts, this is over the last 24 hours. Well, it actually doesn't look like there's been too much in the north, but you do have this one 13 hours ago that is in the north. Don't know. I can't say right now if that was from Hezbollah or Hamas that's operating in the north. But there have been attacks from Hezbollah in the north. Today, not so much, but on other days, yes. It is currently going on. Continuing. Fortunately, God has promised that he shall smite her wealth in the sea, and she shall be consumed by fire. Hezbollah is destined to be destroyed. And this, is, of course, is according to his own personal interpretation. And it very well could be. Maybe that is what these verses are talking about. A war in the south. Ashkelon shall see and fear, and Gaza, and she shall quake violently, and Ekron, for the one whom she looked was ashamed. And a king was lost from Gaza, and Ashkelon shall not be inhabited. And the strangers shall dwell in Ashdod, and I will cut off the pride of the Philistines. Zechariah 9, 5 through 6. The modern-day cities of Ashkelon and Ashdod on Israel's southern Mediterranean coast are under Israeli control. In ancient times, however, the cities of Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gaza, Ekron, and Gath were the strongholds of the Philistines in Gaza. Okay, and we were just looking at that here. So these were strongholds. Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, right there. To be clear, the quote-unquote Palestinians of today do not descend from and bear no relation to the ancient Philistines who dwelled along Israel's coast in biblical times. It was only on May 28, 1964, the date on which the PLO was established, that the Arabs in Israel began using the name Palestinian. Nevertheless, I believe it is no accident that today's Arabs of Gaza have taken on the name Palestinian, for they share something in common with the Philistines of old. The Philistines of the biblical era were the Jewish people's most persistent and terrible adversary. Beginning with the era of Samson and continuing through the generations of Samuel, Saul, and David, the Philistines were consistently the most dangerous foe of the 12 tribes of Israel. When Zechariah tells us that God will cut off the pride of the Philistines, he must be referring to the Palestinians of our time, the evil spiritual descendants of ancient Philistines, for the ancient Philistines no longer exist. Okay, now really quick, I want to make sure that everyone knows that's not necessarily my opinion, because there's always going to be good people in any group, any country, any religion, any group. There's always going to be good people. Generally speaking, I don't know, because maybe you could just limit this to like Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and those that aren't part of those two things, but maybe are more radical, that really support those two groups, or groups in the West Bank like Lion's Den and groups like that, or Hezbollah. So we want to be careful. It's our church's stance. We don't take sides. Israel versus the Palestinians, or the Palestinians versus Israel. We love them both. We recognize that they're descendants of Ishmael, and that there are good among them. There are good ones. So just want to make that clear for anyone that's listening. But you can see how he could be kind of right, at least when it applies to the more radical of them, those that do horrible things, that do things that our Heavenly Father wouldn't be happy with. Okay. The arrogance of Hamas and the Palestinian people will be cut off. And I will remove his blood from his mouth and his detestable things from between his teeth, and it too shall remain to our God, and it shall be like a study hall in Judah, and Ekron like Jebusi. Zechariah 9:7. God will remove the blood from the mouths of the Palestinians, a people that glorifies death and celebrates the murder of Jewish children with mass celebrations and fireworks. But Israel's victory over Gaza will not merely prevent the Palestinians from committing any further murders. Ekron, the great Palestinian city, will become like Jebusi. What does this mean? The Jebusites were a Canaanite tribe that dwelled in the Jerusalem area. Even after Joshua conquered much of the land of Israel, the Jebusites continued to control Jerusalem. It was David, 400 years later, who conquered the Jebusites and transformed Jerusalem from a pagan Jebusite city to the capital of Israel and the seat of God's glory. In this verse, Zechariah says that the Philistine cities of Gaza will be transformed into Jewish cities, such as Jerusalem was. The day will come when the streets of Gaza City will not be used to train terrorists, but rather as a study hall in Judah. Now, I want to stop here. That could be true. When the second coming happens, the only ones that are going to be left are those that are living at least a terrestrial law, those that are upright and just. So people that are living a terrestrial law, and then, of course, people living a celestial law. But anyone living a telestial law will not remain. And so therefore, I'm pretty sure that anyone that's engaging in these extreme activities, extreme hostilities, and terrorism and so forth are most likely living a telestial law. So you're not going to have this same political strife that you have right now. And just like how the Jews will recognize Christ when he comes, I'm sure that many of those that remain that are Palestinians or Arabs from other places will also recognize him. Maybe not all, but yeah, a lot of these places will probably in a very fundamental way be transformed from how they are right now. It's going to be pretty incredible. You're not going to have the hostility that exists today. These different groups, political entities that are against Israel. Everything's going to be changed. So I agree with that. It's important to note, we don't believe that all Arabs or Palestinians are going to be, burned at the second coming, but there's many, many, many of them that are good and righteous that will remain, and probably many of them will accept the gospel. Okay. Zechariah 9:8, and I will encamp beside my house against a garrison of those passing by and of those returning, and no oppressor shall overrun them, for now I have seen with my eyes. On October 7th, Hamas terrorists overran Israel's southern border. In this verse, God promises that Israel will not be overrun again. Okay, so now that's interesting to point out, because if what's going on right now is if Zechariah chapter 9 is talking about what's going on now, and that this is the last time that people are going to run across a border that are going to attack into Israel, then that means that this is the end. That this would in fact be that final war, the war of Gog and Magog. As Rashi explains, quote, I will encamp beside my house to protect it from those who set up a garrison and raiders that they should not set these up against it. End quote. What has changed? God says, "For now I have seen with my eyes." On that terrible day, God hid his countenance from his people, but now God's eyes are opened, and Hamas will not again succeed in overrunning the people of Israel. Well, we'll have to wait and see, and I hope that that's true. I hope that this is the final war. Quote, "You two, with the blood of your you two, with the blood of your covenant, I have freed your prisoners from a pit in which there was no water." End quote. This verse, more than any other, made my heart stop. As I was writing these words, or as I write these words, Hamas terrorists are holding 242 innocent men, women, and children as hostages. They have imprisoned these hostages deep underground among the 500 miles of terror tunnels that Hamas built underground in Gaza. For the last 17 years, Hamas has used billions of dollars of international aid to build these tunnels and buy weapons instead of using the money to build the Gazan economy. "I have freed your prisoners from a pit in which there was no water. Please, God, may these words come true today. Please free our hostages who are hidden in a pit deep beneath the earth. Bring them home to us now." So this is what I was talking about earlier, how maybe there is like a dual meaning to that verse. Maybe it could literally be describing what's happening right now, the way that Elie Michel is writing it here, talking about people that are literally without water and that are prisoners. However, again, the only thing I can say for sure is that we do interpret that for sure in the one way, that it would refer to those that, especially I think those that are in the spirit world that don't currently have the gospel, those among which missionary work is taking place, and also those who are having their work done in the temples today, the necessary ordinances for exaltation. So anyway, that's for sure. And then as far as this interpretation of the prisoners in the tunnels, yeah, maybe it's referring to that too. Maybe there's a double meaning. An attack from Yemen, Zechariah 9:14. "And the Lord shall appear over them, and his arrows shall go forth like lightning. And the Lord shall sound the shofar," which is like that, the ram's horn, if you don't know what a shofar is. So "the Lord shall sound the ram's horn, and shall go with the whirlwinds of Yemen." Now, it doesn't say Yemen in the King James version of the Bible. And I went to Zechariah, which is like it's like a really good site for Jewish texts, including the Bible. It's there, at least the Old Testament, or what they refer to as the Tanakh. The Old Testament, it's the Tanakh. So you go here and you have like the different translations to the right. And I looked through these different translations in this verse, and none of them say Yemen. So I don't know if Elie Michel was kind of like inserting that there, or if there's like a different version, a different translation where it does say Yemen. I don't know the history of Yemen. I don't know how far back that name goes, or the etymology of it, or when it started. So all I can say is that on Zechariah, it does not appear that that Yemen is used in this verse. It just says, "And I will go with whirlwinds in the south." In the King James version, sorry, what was the verse? 14. In the King James version, it says, "And the Lord God shall blow the trumpet, and shall go with whirlwinds of the south." Okay, so this may just be kind of like part of his theory. Maybe he just inserted the word or the name Yemen. Okay, last week, the Iranian-backed Houthi, I have such a hard time with that, Houthi rebels of Yemen launched missiles and drone attacks against Israel from the south. In this verse, God promises that, quote, "his arrows shall go forth like lightning," end quote, and he will bring retribution upon Yemen from the air. May we soon see Israeli missiles raining down upon the Houthi terrorists of Yemen. Yeah, if you didn't know, we've talked about it on the channel before, but there have been missiles coming from Yemen. Okay, Yemen is right here. It's on the other side of Saudi Arabia. Essentially, you have I guess technically Jordan and Saudi Arabia in between Israel and Yemen, but they've been sending rockets up to Israel. They basically said that they're joining in the fight. They didn't officially say that they declared war, and it's just the Houthis in the west, because different parts of the country are under control of different groups, because there's been this civil war, but the Houthis are in control of this western part where you have Sana'a, which is the capital of Yemen. But anyway, yeah, they've been attacking Israel with missiles, ballistic missiles. In fact, I have this interesting article pulled up. I got this email from Patty Jo Stanaway, which gave me a link to a YouTube video, and it looks like it's Glenn Beck. I haven't watched this, but I did find an article from Gizmodo that backs up that video in the title of it. Humanity just witnessed its first space battle. Okay, so what's that all about? Early last week, Israel's Arrow 2 missile system successfully intercepted and destroyed a suborbital ballistic missile suspected of launching from Yemen. It's a notable technology achievement, but one with potentially serious legal and geopolitical implications. The Israeli Defense Force shot down an Iranian manufactured ballistic missile using its Arrow 2 anti-missile system, Haaretz reported. The incident happened on Tuesday, October 31st, when Yemeni forces, possibly targeting Eilat, an Israeli city on the coast of the Red Sea. The Telegraph claims the missile was intercepted and destroyed above the Karman line, which is about 62 miles above sea level. And destroyed above the Karman line, which at 62 miles above sea level is widely recognized as the boundary of space. There have been many earlier instances of missile-on-missile interceptions above the Karman, according to Harvard-Smithsonian astronomer Jonathan McDowell. However, all previous cases involved interceptors targeting missiles launched by the same party for testing purposes, whereas this is the first occurrence of a missile successfully intercepting an incoming missile from an adversary in space. McDowell, an expert on space launches, explained to Gizmodo over email. Okay, so basically, putting all tests aside of these different systems, this is like the first wartime combat success of this system having taken place in space. Now, of course, that would be according to, we don't know what's classified. We don't know if maybe other things have taken place in space. We may not know that until the future, but at least on the surface, this appears to be the first wartime, quote unquote, battle or exchange in space, which is really interesting. From Yemen to Israel, trying to hit, they think, this town at the very southern tip of Israel, Eilat. Okay. So from the south, you have Yemen and Gaza. From the north, you have Lebanon. And then, depending on the truth, and whenever we find these things out, most likely Iran and possibly Russia as well. And then Turkey recently has been very hostile toward Israel. So, and we haven't seen the whole story play out yet. So we'll see what happens. Okay. Going back here. Israel's Great Awakening. Israel will defeat its enemies both in the north and the south, but at the same time, Israel itself will be transformed. Return to the stronghold, you prisoners of hope. Also today, I will restore to you a double promise. The people of Israel are described poignantly as prisoners of hope. Through thousands of years of exile and persecution, the people of Israel refused to give up hope. They never gave up on the dream of returning to their homeland, which God had promised them throughout the Bible. If there was ever a nation that could recover from the horrors committed by Hamas on October 7th, it is Israel, the prisoners of hope. I'm going to skip down a little bit. God promises that the children of Zion will awaken, a prophecy that has come true before our eyes. Jews in Israel and throughout the world are awakening from their spiritual slumber. Now, of course, we know that this is taking place on many different levels because we know that the church has been restored. The first vision was in 1820, and then the church was officially restored and founded in 1830. And it was around that same time that the Messianic Jewish movement started, and it continues to this day. It started essentially 11 years before the first vision, so in parallel to the restoration that's taken place with the church. We know that the Jews are gathering to Israel. That's what they're supposed to do. Joseph Smith sent Orson Hyde in 1841 to the Holy Land to dedicate it for the return of the Jews. And that is taking place right now. So there's definitely a great awakening that's taking place, both among the Jews as well as Ephraim and the other tribes that are being gathered. They are standing up with pride and strength, and they are returning to the God of Israel. In recent weeks, tens of thousands of secular Israeli soldiers have requested tzitzit, the tassels Jews are commanded to wear on the corners of their garments. And this is tzitzit right here. I did a video about this recently. It's not the same as the garment, but this was commanded in the law of Moses to wear these. And the function of this, basically the tzitzit and the talit together are similar to that of the temple garment, but they're not the same thing. Okay, let's see. Thousands of videos are circulating of Israeli soldiers of all religious backgrounds praying intensely before heading into battle. So you have people that are less religious that are seemingly, maybe becoming a little bit more religious, maybe heading in that direction. For how great is their goodness and how great is their beauty. Corn will give strength to young men, and new wine will cause maids to speak. The young men and women of Israel will rise up and reveal to the world their goodness and beauty, which had heretofore been hidden from sight. One of the great tragedies of our generation is the loss of so many young Jews to secularism and woke progressivism. Most young Jews in America and across the world were raised with little Jewish education and almost no connection to their glorious heritage. But since October 7th, many of these young Jews have begun to rediscover their heritage and take pride in being Jews. Shocked by the rabid pro-Hamas anti-Semites that have taken over American universities and scream for the destruction of Israel, they now realize that they have been betrayed by their fellow woke activists. Though many young Jews continue to cling to secularism, a great Jewish awakening has begun. And then here's the last little bit right here. He reads verses 9 through 10 and then says, "The Messiah, Israel's king, is on his way. He will not be like the kings of our enemies. He will not be an arrogant dictator like Vladimir Putin or Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei of Iran. The king of Israel will be just and humble and inaugurate an era of peace. And yes, he is on his way. May the prophecy of Zechariah soon be fulfilled, and may peace return to Israel and the entire world." So this is exciting. It's exciting to hear him, talk about how he believes that Messiah is coming very soon, and how he thinks that Zechariah chapter 9 is referring to the current war, which in part it very well could be. I hope that it is. I feel like it's plausible. And these are some interesting things to talk about. The things that stick out to me are the locations that are identified, among the Phoenicians and the Philistines and their current geographical counterparts. And yeah, just I don't know, just everything that we talked about. It's so interesting. So, but that's going to be it for this one. Hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.